Ronald, the rules lawyer. A post I read on Facebook made me want to rant and make this video. There's a player entitlement problem in modern D&D. We all know that dungeon masters, DMs, are the ones who run the games and make the games possible. DMs do the lion's share of the work. However, players vastly outnumber DMs in online spaces, and so they have the power of numbers. And so online, the maxim prevails that the DM has the job of entertaining the players. That's what I'll rant about today, and specifically about how DMs are expected to run entertaining combats for their players. The modern expectation is not that of the OSR, the old school Renaissance. Parties are expected to directly take on fights that they encounter. This is often called combat as sport. This means that by and large the players are supposed to win at least the vast majority of combats, and that those combats need to be dangerous enough so that they're exciting. You need to find the right difficulty level, so to speak. But in D&D 5th edition, it is well known that it's hard to do that. Either a fight is too easy and therefore boring, or it's too hard and player characters die. We don't want either outcome. So the community places the onus on the DM to address this. If a fight is too easy, bring in waves of monsters, for example. That's a common piece of advice. Or if a fight's too hard, to fudge dice rolls, or to change the enemy's hit points behind the DM screen secretly. The DM's job is to entertain the players, and for combat that means making sure the players win while presenting at the same time the illusion of difficulty. You're constantly being required to put on a magic show of sorts, and if you fail to entertain, if somehow things go wrong and the players aren't happy, the community blames you. First, to introduce myself, I am Ronald, the rules lawyer. I am a lawyer who runs tabletop RPGs. My preferred system is Pathfinder 2e. My detractors like to say I'm a Pathfinder stan who hates D&D for that reason, whereas I think the constant through line for this video and my other videos is that I am a fierce advocate for the game master who runs the game. I ran D&D 5e for 4 years, and I ran Pathfinder 1st Edition and Starfinder in addition to Pathfinder 2. Support my Patreon. I don't make money as a lawyer. For an explanation, see this video on the screen. This allows me to continue making content. Supporting my Patreon gives you ad-free early access and exclusive content. All right, so the Facebook post, or rather the comments to a Facebook post that made me want to rant today, come from a Facebook group called Tiamat's Tavern, a very large group that has over 450,000 members. And it's a place for people to put jokes and memes, things like this. So it's a broad cross-section, I would say, of the D&D community. A dungeon master just came out of the final session of their D&D campaign and posted the following on this Facebook group. I'm going to point out that there's a bit of snark in this post, starting from the first words, which I would also call self-awareness, and I think part of the overreaction of the responses was responding to that. However, the bottom line was, this is a DM asking for advice and asking, am I the asshole? So I'm going to go read. Heartless DM here. So I did a thing last night in our final session last night. Our level 13 wizard, along with a level 13 fighter and barbarian, took on a lich at the top of its tower. Now, I'm going to point out that this is a level 13 party, and a lich is a challenge rating 21 creature. Okay, I'll keep reading. Wizard comes out hot and does 60 plus damage to the lich in the first round. I don't know why, but this rubbed me wrong that he was so powerful. So I asked how many hit points the wizard had. Only 76. So of course the next turn the lich used power word kill instantly, killing our OP wizard. The look on his face was priceless. Though I do feel kind of bad about it, he was way too cocky coming into the encounter. Needless to say, my chalice overflows with my players' tears this morning. Was I too harsh? Now, what does Power Word Kill do? It is the 9th level spell that the Lich has, and if a target has 100 hit points or fewer, the target dies. No saving throw. So when I read this post and saw their question, was I too harsh? My response was no, you weren't too harsh. And you know why? Because it was a fucking Lich. Liches are not only harsh, but they're evil, and they want to kill. Now, I would say it was bad form for a DM to ask for the player's hit points right before doing it. It should be based on the Lich's in-game knowledge. And Power Word Kill, I ran the math, is gonna kill the majority of high-level wizards in D&D. So it was a sound move. And also, it was the wizard who just had taken away half of the Lich's health and likely was the most important threat on the other side, the other players being a barbarian and fighter. And sorry, casters are more dangerous than marshals at these levels. So the Lich was being perfectly reasonable, going for the wizard and trying to kill the wizard. If this were in a court of law, I would argue that this was an act of self-defense. If the tables were turned and the Lich had taken some damage and was below 100 hit points, would it be too harsh for the wizard player to cast Power Word Kill on the Lich? Absolutely not, and we would, of course, agree with that. However, the comments to this post were overwhelmingly negative, and there were 1,500 comments in the first hour. I immediately wanted to rant about this post, and so I took a screenshot of these comments. It was my only screenshot, however, because when I tried to reply to the post in support of the OP's decision, I discovered that the OP had taken down their post. The overwhelmingly negative response, and I would argue bullying from the commenters, made them want to withdraw their post, which I can completely understand. So this is just a small sampling of the comments, but I think they're telling of the overall messages that he received. Here's the first one. So the wizard did wizard things and you simply didn't like it and purposefully killed him off? Yeah, petty as fuck. Would never return to that table again personally. And purposely killing off a player, I don't see the controversy there. Yes, the Lich is trying to defend itself. Next comment. I feel like that was an ego-driven decision. Just because a player is powerful doesn't mean you need to force the BBEG, big bad evil guy, to smite them on your behalf due to your personal feelings outside of the game world. But that's just me. I feel like decisions like that should be reserved for murder hobos. First, because a player is powerful, you try to kill them is described as a bad thing. Of course you try to kill the opponent that is the most powerful. And saying such decisions are reserved for murder hobos, I assume players who are murder hobos. And to that I would say, what is a Lich then, if not a murder hobo times 10? Next comment. Maybe study your player characters more and make more challenging encounters instead of being petty. It's quite obvious to the player what you did there since you asked for their max HP. That's not the way to go. To which I would say, what are more challenging encounters if not ones that might kill the party? You're sending mixed messages here and you're asking the DM to do a song and dance, which I'll get into. Next comment. Why? Question mark, which gets 6 upvotes. Because the Lich wants to survive? Next comment. Power Word Kill is reserved for a desperate attempt of the BBEG if they are out of legendary resistances and defensive capabilities. That if they are going to die, then they are taking at least one person with them. So they will only use it if they're going to lose already? I don't see the logic. If it can prevent them from losing at all, why not use it? Killing an opponent denies the opponent's actions and prevents Healing Word from popping them back up. It is a legitimate act. Do players only save their powerful spells for when their party is already going to lose? I don't think so. And then this comment got 30 upvotes. This is absolutely awful behavior. You should be rewarding your players for being good at things, not just fucking obliterating them. If it were me, I'd never play with you again. First of all, reward players. Are players kids who need gold stars and cookies when they do a good thing? And how good was it to fly up to a Lich and not have counterspell prepared to try to counter spells like this? Or to have Revivify in your party to bring up a party member who gets killed. Players cast Power Word Kill and cast Hypnotic Patterns and Force Cage on big bad evil guys all the time. But suddenly it's bad when it happens to players? Sorry, but when you come out trying to kill somebody, don't be surprised when they try to kill you back. Don't expect gold stars. And no, I don't think it was good to go up to the big bad evil guy without some basic preparations. This Lich had no gold stars for them and rightly gave them death. Now, some commenters pointed to some words in this post and argue that he was being an adversarial DM. Again, I think there was some misinterpretation of their intent. They did come to the forums asking for advice. And I read the post tone as being like it came from the DM of a table where people rib each other a bit and have fun and enjoy memorable moments like this and kind of enjoy interactions like this. And that's why they've return to this DM's table over and over again so as to finish an entire campaign. Those comments about him being overly adversarial, I'm focused less on those and more on the conclusion, the consensus of this thread, that he was a bad DM for having the Lich kill the Wizard. There's an expectation in modern D&D that the DM is supposed to make sure the players win, whether that expectation is spoken or not. One comment I remember reading in the thread said it was the DM's job to make sure the players have fun. And first of all, to that I would say every table has their own idea of fun. Sure, not every group is looking for an intense combat challenge where death can happen for every misstep you make. Maybe you want your PCs to feel like superheroes. Maybe you want a game that's more narrative with continuity in your characters from session to session. Those are all perfectly reasonable. You want to communicate with your group, and this post seems to convey that there might have been a mismatch in expectations between the DM and the players. Okay, parentheses. I followed up with the original poster who said that the group is still together, that they enjoyed the campaign, they enjoyed the memorable moment that this made in the campaign. And I'll share on the screen a couple of messages I got from him on Facebook Messenger. He writes, I think it's just difficult for some to realize that the game can be played so many different ways with so many different rules and whatnot, so the way that you play it may not be the way others do. I don't think anyone's right, it's just the preference of your particular party, as it should be. Any good DM has to tweak the game to reflect their own players, and I just so happen to have a group of murder hobos, lol. So, as it turns out, they did have an understanding at this table. Maybe there was a little shock, but in the end, they agreed with the DM, and he confirmed this. My players all said that it made total sense for the Lich to try something like that, and the party's wizard was killed, but the remaining members did kill the Lich. But what would have been the fun on the very last session of a campaign if the party would have never took a scratch fighting the BBEG? So I think, yes, some commenters misconstrued him as an adversarial DM who his players would hate, because they might not like it at their own tables, which is fair. However, I do think they were wrong by saying it was patently a bad thing for a DM to do in all groups and all campaigns to have the Lich kill the Wizard in that example. And I'll say right now, I'm someone who would enjoy playing in the OP's campaign. And I'm looking at my script and I'm going to read it off because I had not seen his reply on Messenger yet, which makes it sound like I predicted what he would say, and I kind of did. I wrote in my script, what the Lich did here was completely reasonable, and even if you're for a more narrative style, it was the final session against the big bad, and honestly, if my party won while my PC died, I would think that's kind of cool. But that point of view was not acknowledged in these comments that were dogpiling on the DM. They were of saying, how dare you kill a player character? That's not right. You're a bad dungeon master. And I'm like, what were you trying to do, players, to the Lich? Were you trying to convince them with friendship? If monsters aren't trying to kill you back, then what do you think they're doing? Why have combats? Why are we rolling dice and dealing with so much math when we already know who's going to win? The huge pushback this poster got on Facebook dramatized for me that there is a player entitlement problem that has emerged in modern D&D, where the DM is reduced to a subordinate role of an entertainer whose job is to present an illusion of difficulty. In D&D's origins in 1974, the driving idea was a dangerous dungeon created by the dungeon master that was the fruit of the imagination and to some extent cruelty of that dungeon master. Not only the monsters, but the dungeons wanted you to die. This impulse to create maps is a very strong one. In my middle school after-school RPG class, one of the favorite things my students did, the more ambitious ones who were dungeon masters themselves, was drawing maps. There's an example of one of them. For DMs, it is fun to create dangerous environments that surprise your players, and it was fun to find out what happens you didn't know. The game's text told the DM that you were to be a neutral arbiter, and part of that is playing monsters and villains who don't want to die. The monsters fight to win, and if your PC dies, that's part of the thrill. You take your lumps and roll a new character. Now, I don't think the old style is objectively better, and it was a situation that was ripe for abuse under the wrong person's hands. But the DM at least was viewed as a fellow player who had the right to have fun too. And the corrective, of course, if a DM abused their power, was to have no players for their next session. But the modern expectation is that it's supposedly the DM's job to entertain the players. Now, every DM, I would say nearly every DM, including myself, associate the players having fun with your own fun. That's definitely true for me. But there's a reason there's a problem of burnout for D&D Dungeon Masters. Instead of letting the chips fall where they may and being a neutral arbiter and playing the villains to win, you are expected to kind of perform a magic act at all times. There's a very demanding expectation on DMs, something that's very difficult, for them to do two things simultaneously. One, make sure that the players always win, and simultaneously, titillate them with the feeling that they might lose. Make fights dramatic. Make the players feel like they may lose their precious characters, but make sure that they actually don't. It's not that different from building an amusement park ride. Make sure that your customers get the thrill of dropping from great heights or flipping upside down, but make sure you install all the safety features and pass all your safety checks. It is common advice to Dungeon Masters to fudge your rolls, to change a villain's hit points behind the DM screen. And it's common advice in situations like the Facebook post to pull your monster's biggest punches. However, it's supposed to make up for this lack of danger by inserting vivid descriptions, describing black ichor or crackling eldritch energy to make up for the lack of danger that was already baked into old school D&D. You didn't have to give a feeling of danger when you had 5 hit points, died at 0, and a goblin just hit you and you're about to roll a die that does 1 to 6 damage. And what makes this all kind of crazy is that the players know that they're winning because they know that their DM is making sure they don't lose. And how do I know this? Because that's what they all said in that Facebook thread. At least that's what good DMs are supposed to do. But during a game, do not utter this fact. It's an unspoken agreement by the people in the room that no one is supposed to utter out loud because you don't want to break the illusion. Now, when a PC dies and the players are unhappy about that, do we ask if there was a mismatching in expectations between the players and the DM? That's usually not what happens online. Usually, they blame the DM. The death would not have happened if the DM had not done X, after all. And it's an unfair assignment of blame on the person who did all the work and made the game possible in the first place. By nature, players far outnumber Dungeon Masters, and so this sentiment becomes the prevailing one in online spaces. There is this culture of entitlement among players where the DM is expected to serve players, it's their job, and the customer is always right. But I didn't make this video simply to rant against players. I think that the problem is systemic. I'm about to talk about how D&D's rules create this problem for Dungeon Masters, and I'm going to illustrate things that I think many players who want more exciting combat will also agree are problems. And I think that those players and DMs should unite in demanding more as customers of a product, of a game, that it should better enable them to have the kinds of stories they want to have a workable encounter system, for example, and also to prevent your dungeon master, your beleaguered dungeon master, from burning out trying to make the game exciting for you. I think the root of the problem with D&D 5e is that it is simultaneously promising different things that are not fully compatible. It presents itself as a crunchy tactical combat game where your decisions matter, which requires some danger. For your decisions to matter, there has to be a possibility of failure, while simultaneously promising to players a power fantasy that they get to be superheroes and awesome in the fiction. So that means we have crunchy rules for combat while also providing guardrails at the same time to prevent characters from dying. Spells like Healing Word or Mass Healing Word or Revivify, which lets you revive a dead character if you cast it in time for the low cost of 1/5 of an armor of full plate. D&D provides these guardrails and demands of the Dungeon Master to present a feeling of real danger. So now you can't just present a deadly encounter and expect the system to deliver a deadly feeling. If your party is starting to stop those encounters, you're going to have to escalate things by putting in more monsters, or homebrewing your own monsters, or throwing CR21 creatures like the Lich against a level 13 party, as in our Facebook post. Now, all this improvisation is bound to lead to things spinning out of control occasionally, and you're going to have to improvise behind the screen to make sure that things don't go off track and some PC dies that you don't want to die. It's now orthodoxy for DMs to fudge dice and change hit point totals behind the screen, all while keeping your inner nightmare hidden from your players, while simultaneously trying to convince the players that they're in real danger of the death that you are making sure is not happening to them. The end result is that if a death occurs in a D&D campaign, it's because the dungeon master decided to let it happen. And I'm going to share a post on Reddit from a burnt out 5e DM who expressed this. They wrote, "Throwing balance out the window with 5e helped make it the worst system to ever DM. Combat was no longer a storytelling element. You couldn't build suspenseful encounters because either the party would roll over them like they were nothing, or the party would just get stomped. With variance that huge, it always came down to DM hand-waving. This results in the outcome of D&D combats coming not from the decisions of the players, but in reality from the decision the DM made on how successful they would be. Similarly, there are tactics that are widely considered to be very powerful in Dungeons & Dragons that are kind of memed in the meta and in online discussions. And the understanding is that these tactics are for players only. There is the infamous microwave strat, where Force Cage forces creatures to be trapped in a 20-foot cube, no saving throw, and Sickening Radiance cooks them and gives them levels of exhaustion until they die. There are many other similar combos, usually having to do with 5e spells. And if players figured these things out, it logically follows that big bad evil guys who have attained the pinnacles of power in the fantasy world have probably figured them out also. But it's considered bad DM form for the villains to act realistically and use the same tactics against players that players use against them. So again, in this system, if a party death happens, it is often because the DM decided it would happen, because an encounter they presented to the players spun out of control, and or they decided to not pull a punch that would have been out of character for their big bad evil guy, like our Lich. And again, we see the injustice. When a victory happens, the victory belongs to the players. We are told to reward the players, we DMs. However, if the players lose, it's the DM's fault. Similarly, if a DM plays the monsters to win, they are often branded an adversarial DM, quote unquote. Let's say the party's wizard is knocked down in a combat, a very powerful wizard, and the party's cleric raises them up with a healing word bonus action spell. Well, the next time the wizard gets knocked down, then naturally, if the bad guys want to keep that wizard down, they will try to counterspell the cleric who tries to use the same spell to bring the wizard up again. However, that is often considered a bad thing to do if you ask most people in the D&D community. Again, that is another tactic that is only to be used by players, not against players. Also, DMs sometimes find that their player characters have abilities that trivialize encounters or challenges that they wanted to present. And a DM who tries to counter these strong abilities does so at their own peril. They might be branded a adversarial DM or someone who hates fun or hates their players. One example that challenges many DMs is the spell that D&D gives us called Leomund's Tiny Hut. It is a ritual, so it doesn't cost some casters any resource even, that allows the party to do a long rest and restore all of their daily abilities. It has two contradictory descriptions of its shape. It says that it is a hemisphere here, and hemispheres have a base at the bottom, And it also says that it is an immobile dome of force that is around and above you, which strongly implies that there is no floor to the dome, and therefore something can burrow underneath the dome and up to meet the party. One DM read this language to say exactly that and posted this post on the subreddit D&D Next, titled, "Leomund's tiny hut doesn't protect enemies from below." About 3 or 4 years before this post, Jeremy Crawford, lead rules designer of D&D, had posted 2 contradictory tweets about how to interpret this shape. First, he said that it was a dome and therefore not a hemisphere. There is no floor. 1 month later, he said it does have a floor because it is hemispherical. I'll say now that it's completely reasonable for a DM to rely on the text of a spell that has contradictory text and give that more authority than a tweet. They decided not to errata the spell after all. So that was this person's position on Reddit. However, the response was quite hostile to this dungeon master. This person wrote, "I feel like this is a case of a DM wanting to find loopholes in the rules to antagonize their players. I can't think of any other reason you would have any desire to rule on this like that, or even consider it. Maybe just let your players have their spell?" Well, obviously there is a reason why they would consider this, because they felt that the spell was trivializing the adventuring day if they could get all of their daily resources very quickly, without much risk. But no, this DM was painted as adversarial, as someone who doesn't want their players to have fun, who is looking for loopholes, being a rules lawyer to deny the players their abilities. Another commenter assumed that this DM was surprising their players with this ruling. However, the DM responded that they in fact were putting it in a document on exploration in their campaign and making their players aware of it in advance. The response? Well, your guide is already off to an awful start, and that gets a lot of upvotes. So woe betide the DM who shares stories of their table where they do not reward their players for being good at things, quote unquote. If your players are steamrolling your adventure or your encounters, any effort to provide some pushback is considered adversarial, and you're a bad DM. Stop acting like murder hobos. Only players can do that, not the evil villains we are so awesome for defeating. And now I'm going to say something that is counterintuitive to some people, that these DMs who are being accused of being adversarial DMs on a power trip are actually doing the opposite. They want the rules of the world to allow them, to free them, to play their villains to win without steamrolling the players. They want neither the players to have ways to auto-win, and they also don't want the villains to have ways to auto-win. They want the freedom to play the monsters like they seriously want to win because they don't want to play God. They want to be the neutral arbiter. They don't want to be in the position of a Pontius Pilate who decides with a wave of their hand whether the PCs die. They're trying to create a structure or rules, house rules, what have you, to present real challenges to the players so that it's the players' decisions that decide whether they overcome and not the DMs. They don't want this conspiracy of silence. They want the players who know about the conspiracy to know that they actually won on their own terms, and not because the DM let them and gave them some gold stars. And there are many players who feel this way too. They want to earn their victories. This culture that places the blame on the DM, that forces DMs to have to improvise things to make up for shortcomings in the rules, that tells them that the game is, quote, theirs to fix, unquote, while simultaneously marginalizing any efforts they make that might veer against the players. All this combining with the disproportionate workload that falls on the GM explains why there is a crisis of a DM shortage for D&D. And there is a burgeoning industry of people who run D&D professionally to fill this gap. My colleague and fellow YouTuber Swingwhipper was a 5e DM for several years and ran a campaign up to level 18, and he put in a lot of work to handcraft homebrew monsters and combats to challenge that high-level party. And I share his statement of what the expectations for D&D DMs are. As one who learned TTRPGs from the modern D&D 5e crowd, I can definitely say that the school of GMing is, at least this was the common advice and attitude on the D&D and D&D Next subreddits when I was learning about 4 to 5 years ago, doubt too much has changed. 1. Killing players is bad. 2. The game should focus on a great story, read plot. 3. 3 hours of prep for 1 hour of playtime is the expected norm for a good quality game. 4. If something goes wrong, it is the GM's fault somehow, probably, at least mostly, as the GM has the most power over the table, exacerbated by the issues I've talked about in this video. 5. You should never, or at least very rarely, stop a player from acting either by abilities or shutting down creativity. Then he says there is a reason 5e GMs are talked about like scarred war veterans after finishing a campaign. So some final thoughts. Players vastly outnumber DMs in the hobby and in online spaces. In August of 2022, I took a screenshot of this post in the D&D Discord where people were able to take roles to be a player or to be a DM or to be some other things. And the number of players was about 65,000 and the number of DMs was about 2,300. Now, I don't think this is an accurate sampling of the full broader community. I'm sure some people wanted to avoid being asked to DM strangers on this Discord server, but this is a large ratio that isn't only explained by what I just said. I think there really is a DM shortage, and many anecdotal testimonies say there is a DM shortage. And current problems in 5e are only likely to worsen given that the surveys leading up to the new edition and all of the marketing for 5.5e, which I call it, the vast majority of it has been geared towards players and giving their characters new toys to use against monsters that would be problems in the hands of monsters. The surveys during the quote-unquote playtest did not ask respondents whether they were a DM or not, so player votes vastly dominated the survey. I did a video on this channel, and I'll link to it at the end and in the video description, where I cover how the new edition does not have Dungeon Masters in mind. I'll just add a couple of things to that video. First, it's now well known that the spell Conjure Minor Elementals can lead to massive damage from spellcasters. Hundreds of points of damage, in fact. Also, the new rules for stealth, which have been receiving a lot of criticism, say explicitly that you lose the invisible condition if you cast a spell with a verbal component. So that strongly implies that you can cast spells without verbal components from hiding without being noticed, strong spells like Hypnotic Pattern and Counterspell. Needless to say, a villain who uses either of these spells without the party knowing where it came from and having no chance to prevent it is probably not going to be very popular with most players. This is another case of tactics having the unspoken label to be used by PCs only. Hasbro and WotC continue to be focused almost entirely, I would say, if not entirely, on player satisfaction and not DM satisfaction. And this is consistent with what they said at the end of 2022, where they said that most of the people at the table were players and that they were not monetized enough, and declaring that Hasbro will create a recurrent spending environment where players as well as DMs will be spending money on things. To which some of you may be wondering, don't they understand that you need DMs to run D&D? Well, they did think about it, and they are trying to replace the DM. This is their August 4th job posting to have a principal AI engineer to work for Dungeons & Dragons who will develop AI that does things that includes intelligent generation of text dialogue and NPC behaviors. They're definitely thinking of an AI DM for their new virtual tabletop. Hasbro and WotC have not been focused on improving life for the DM because they see the need for a DM as an artificial cap on the market growth of their game. I think that D&D's marketing, presenting itself as a all-in-one solution for all kinds of tabletop role-playing game styles, is behind all of this. They can be occasion for great, memorable, crunchy tactical combat. They can have great character moments. You can have the sense of danger exploring a dangerous dungeon. However, no one TTRPG can do all of these things best, which is kind of the marketing of 5e. To which I would say, if a DM for 5e feels exhausted and is not familiar with other systems besides 5e, the edition change is a great time to look at other alternatives, either to experiment with other systems or at least to inform your own running of D&D. Hasbro WotC might have a near monopoly on the industry, but they don't need to have a monopoly on your mind. These other games fall in several broad categories. The OSR games, Old School Renaissance, are inspired by the older editions of D&D. The new game Shadow Dark just won ENnie Awards and is an example of the OSR. For some DMs, running an older school style game where maybe you're focused on a dungeon, maybe not, but where the villains and monsters are acting to win is a relief, something that takes some of the burden off of them and allows them to engage the game as people having fun themselves. Narrative games, also sometimes called rules light games, which is kind of a misnomer. Some of the OSR games are also rules light, but narrative games like Powered by the Apocalypse and its derivatives facilitate more narrative play. Meanwhile, TTRPGs that are combat games that are more balanced than 5e, games like Pathfinder 2e, D&D 4th edition, Lancer, they empower the game master to decide, well, if you want the players to win, you can design an encounter easy enough where they will win. And if you want to present a tough but fair tactical challenge, you can tune the combat to be that if you want to. Of course, going with one of these other systems doesn't mean you have to abandon the other pillars of TTRPGs. You can still have narrative weight in an OSR game or in a Pathfinder game. And there is, of course, thrilling combat in narrative games. They just approach combat in a different way. The difference with these other systems is that you at least are getting solid support for what you do want to focus on. It shouldn't feel like a job to be a game master. You're a player too. And because you run the game, you have more right than anybody to have fun. So that's it. That concludes my critique of the player entitlement problem in D&D 5e and the fact that it doesn't have to be this way. If you enjoyed the video, support my channel by liking and subscribing to get notified of my future videos, and support my Patreon to allow me to continue making videos. It gives you ad-free early access to most of my videos and exclusive content. And also join my Discord community where we talk about Pathfinder 2e and gaming. And we also share lots of comments on the internet that we find to be poorly thought through in our ranting channel. And there we rant together in a safe space. And I think many people who appreciate this video will appreciate that. So that's it. I have been Ronald the Rules Lawyer. See you next time.